I just don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Is it always green?
Do you remember when children's television was wild, unpredictable, and just a little bit dangerous? When laughter came with the risk of being drenched in green slime, and every episode felt like a dare against the grown-up world. Long before cartoons became sleek and safe, there was one show that broke every rule. You can't do that on television. It didn't come from Hollywood or even America, but from a small studio in Ottawa where ordinary kids created extraordinary chaos. There were no polished actors, no moral lessons, and certainly no rules about what could or couldn't happen on TV. Just laughter, slime, and the thrill of rebellion. For those who grew up watching it, the memory is both sweet and strange, a reminder of a time when television wasn't afraid to get messy. This is the untold story behind that beautiful green-stained madness. Fact number 12. Believe it or not, this show didn't even start on Nickelodeon. Before You Can't Do That on Television became a cornerstone of Nickelodeon, it was something much smaller, humbler, and stranger. In 1979, inside a modest television studio in Ottawa, Canada, a local station called CJOH-TV launched a quirky experiment, a sketch show made entirely by and for kids. It didn't have a marketing plan, a toy line, or even an idea of what it wanted to be. The walls were thin, the lights buzzed, and the props were often borrowed from whatever other productions happened to be filming nearby. Yet from that little studio, a cultural phenomenon, the show's creators, Roger Price and Jeffrey Darby, wanted to see what would happen if children were given the freedom usually reserved for adults on television. No laugh tracks, no polished performances, just chaos, honesty, and the unpredictable rhythm of real life. It was Canadian television, at its weirdest and most experimental sketches about school parents and the confusing hypocrisy of adults delivered with a wink and a punchline. When Nickelodeon executives stumbled upon the show in 1981, they were a young network searching for identity, something different from the educational or polished content that dominated children's programming in the US. They saw this raw Canadian import and thought, let's see if American kids get it. The edited episodes began airing in 1982, and within months, You Can't Do That on Television became the most watched show on the network. Nickelodeon's executives quickly realized they had found their blueprint not just for a show, but for a brand philosophy. In that chaotic mix of sarcasm, sketch comedy, and flying slime, Nickelodeon discovered what it meant to be rebellious, unpredictable, and unfiltered. This little Ottawa production quietly became the heartbeat of a network that would shape the childhoods of millions. It didn't start on Nickelodeon, but it made Nickelodeon Nickelodeon. Fact number 11. The show's most famous face wasn't even supposed to be there. Among the many strange stories surrounding the show, none feels more cinematic than the tale of Christine Moose McGlade, a teenager who became the face of an entire generation by complete accident. She wasn't planning to be on television that day. She wasn't even auditioning. She had gone to the studio simply to support a friend who wanted to try out. When Roger Price saw her, he pointed at her and said something that would alter her life. You either audition or leave. Startled, Moose agreed to read a few lines. She wasn't polished or trained, but she had something far more valuable: authenticity. Her natural sarcasm, awkward timing, and ability to deliver jokes as if she were unimpressed by the entire situation made her instantly. Price cast her on the spot. And from that moment forward, Moose became the show's anchor, the one who held together the swirling madness of slime locker jokes and sketch chaos. Viewers saw in her what they saw in themselves, a real kid unimpressed by adults and unafraid to get messy. As years passed, Moose remained the emotional core of You Can't Do That on television. Decades later, McGlade would leave acting, earn a master's degree, and become a respected media executive and educator. But for anyone who grew up in the 1980s, her smirk under a falling wave of slime remains unforgettable, a reminder that serendipity, when mixed with courage, can create television history. Fact number 10. The producers made a bold rule: no real actors allowed. In a decade obsessed with Hollywood polish, "You can't do that on television" took the complete opposite path. Roger Price and Jeffrey Darby didn't want kids who could cry on cue or deliver perfect sitcom timing. They wanted real kids, awkward, fidgeting, authentic children who sometimes forgot their lines or burst into laughter mid-scene. Price's casting philosophy was brutally simple. If they can act, they don't belong here. So auditions became less about performance and more about personality. The chosen cast were everyday Ottawa children, students who biked to the studio. Filming was deliberately scheduled around school hours. Scenes were often chaotic, unscripted, and full of improvisation. Price believed that the humor should come from mistakes, not rehearsed perfection. When a kid stumbled through a line, he didn't yell, "Cut," he encouraged them to keep going, because real life was This approach created a kind of magic. Watching the show, that decision not to hire professionals didn't just save money, it gave "You can't do that on television" a charm that Hollywood couldn't fake. The laughter was real, the surprise was genuine, and the chemistry between the kids felt unfiltered. It's the reason the show never seemed like it was talking. Fact number 9. Its opening animation looked oddly familiar. From the very first frame, the show announced its weirdness. Conveyor belts of decapitated heads, mechanical hammers, smashing into cartoon skulls, and endless loops of industrial absurdity, all wrapped in a Dixieland version of Rossini's William Tell Overture. That animated chaos wasn't just random, it was a direct tribute and partial imitation of Terry Gilliam's surreal animation from Monty Python's Flying Circus. Jeffrey Darby, the show's producer, admitted years later, "We ripped it off a lot." But that was the point. The producers wanted to bring that same surreal, anarchic. Monty Python had used cutout animation to break rules and mock authority. You Can't Do That on Television did the same, except its targets were cafeteria food, clueless parents, and overzealous teachers. The opening montage was like a warning label: this was not polite television. Even the design of the opening factory, often called the children's television sausage factory, was symbolic. It mocked the idea that kids' programming was a product churned out by adults who didn't understand children. Instead, this show gave the control, at least the illusion of control, back to the kids. The chaotic intro became iconic. Viewers could recognize the show by borrowing from Python and twisting it into something mischievously innocent. The creators of You Can't Do That on Television gave children their first taste of satire. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it resonated so deeply. It made kids feel like insiders to a grown-up joke, sharing in the mischief rather than being shielded from it. Fact number 8. Unlike every other children's show, this one refused to teach. In the early 1980s, children's television followed one golden rule: it had to teach something. Sesame Street taught literacy. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood taught empathy. Even cartoons had moral lessons neatly packaged at the end of every episode. But You Can't Do That on Television proudly broke that rule and then slimed it for good measure. Roger Price was openly rebellious toward the concept of educational TV. He believed that kids spent their entire day in classrooms absorbing lessons, lectures, and rules. When they came home, they didn't need more lessons, they needed laughter, anarchy, and release. As he once explained, this philosophy became the backbone of the show. There were no very special episodes, no moral resolutions, and certainly no life lessons. Instead, sketches focused on detention nightmares, cafeteria disasters, and teachers who never made sense. Adults were portrayed as clueless, hypocritical, or hilariously cruel, often played by Les Lie in various disguises. The message wasn't malicious, it was liberating. It told kids that it was okay to question authority, to laugh at adults, and to find humor in the absurdities of the grown-up world. For many children, this was the first time television treated them as equals, not as students. Christine McGlade later described the show as what would happen if the kids took over the studio. That sense of rebellion defined You Can't Do That on Television, a show that proudly taught absolutely nothing. And somehow, that honesty became its own kind of education. Fact number 7, it turned grossness into comedy. Before Ren and Stimpy smeared boogers across screens and SpongeBob SquarePants turned absurdity into art, You Can't Do That on Television was already making kids laugh and gag with its unapologetically gross humor. The show's writers reveled in bodily functions and cafeteria horror stories. Buckets of fake vomit, fart jokes, burping contests, and a mysterious dungeon full of gags about being executed for telling bad jokes became staples of every episode. While other shows avoided disgusting topics, this one dove right into them with glee. This brand of gross-out comedy wasn't just for shock value, it was social commentary disguised as slime. By mocking the sanitized, moralizing tone of traditional kids' shows, You Can't Do That on Television gave children permission to laugh at the taboo. It was a safe rebellion, dirty, silly, and subversively honest. Animator John Kricfalusi, who would later create Ren and Stimpy, once admitted that his show wouldn't have existed without You Can't Do That on Television. Its influence rippled across decades of kids' entertainment, making absurdity and bodily humor an accepted part of pop culture. Parents were often horrified, teachers complained, but for kids it was magic, a show that understood their sense of humor perfectly. You Can't Do That on Television didn't just invent slime. It invented the idea that being disgusting could be funny, and in doing so, it changed the trajectory of children's comedy forever. Fact number 6, getting slimed wasn't a punishment. In most television shows, getting drenched in sticky green goo would be a nightmare. But on You Can't Do That on Television, it was a career highlight, especially for the young cast. That's because slime wasn't just part of the comedy. It came with a pay raise. According to Jeffrey Darby, the show's producer, every time a kid got hit with a bucket of water for saying wet or water, they earned an extra $75. But if they got slimed after saying I don't know, they earned a whopping $150, a fortune for a 12-year-old in the 1980s. Suddenly, kids weren't avoiding slime, they were chasing it. Actors began accidentally saying the forbidden phrase, hoping to trigger the famous bucket drop from above. The production team even noticed that some of the cast were perfecting their I don't know timing, pausing just long enough to make sure the cameras were ready. It became a game within the show, a mixture of suspense and comedy that made each slime moment unpredictable. The payment system wasn't just a reward, it was an acknowledgement. Getting slimed was physically unpleasant. The mixture smelled bad, stuck to clothes, and clung to hair for days. Some kids described it as cold oatmeal mixed with baby shampoo and glue. Paying them extra was a small gesture of respect for enduring something so hilariously awful. In a way, that slime economy perfectly captured the show's spirit. Kids were rewarded not for being perfect, but for being brave enough to get messy. It turned humiliation into empowerment and a paycheck. Fact number 5, not every episode survived. For a show that specialized in chaos, You Can't Do That on Television rarely crossed the line. But in 1987, one episode did, and it was pulled from the air almost immediately. The episode, titled Adoption, was meant to be just another tongue-in-cheek look at family life. But some of its jokes involving adopted children and insensitive humor didn't land well. Parents and advocacy groups complained, and Nickelodeon executives quickly realized they had gone too far. The episode was banned in the United States, pulled from syndication and labeled "Do Not Air." In Canada, a different episode titled "Divorce" met the same fate. Both became pieces of television lost media episodes that fans could only whisper about or search for in grainy VHS copies decades later. What's striking is that this ban came from a network known for pushing boundaries. Nickelodeon had built its identity on the show's irreverence. Yet even here they discovered there were limits to satire, especially when it touched real emotional wounds. For many fans, those banned episodes became part of the show's mythology. A reminder that "you can't do that" on television was never afraid to test the edge of what was acceptable. It was a children's show that often felt like a rebellion against adults, but it occasionally proved just how thin the line between bold humor and bad taste could be. Still, the controversy only cemented its cult status. It reminded viewers that the show wasn't afraid to fail spectacularly in pursuit of laughter, and that perhaps was its most human quality. Fact number 4. Among the slime and laughter, future legends were hiding. Behind the buckets of slime and the endless laughter, "You Can't Do That" on television quietly launched careers that no one could have predicted. Among the dozens of kids who passed through the show's Ottawa studio, 2 names would one day echo across pop culture: Alanis Morissette and Bill Prady. In 1986, a young Alanis Morissette, barely in her teens, joined the cast. With her long hair braces and a voice that hadn't yet become the powerhouse of Jagged Little Pill, she was just another kid laughing through the chaos. She only appeared in a few episodes, but she was slimed at least 3 times. Years later, fans would look back in disbelief that the queen of 1990s alternative rock once stood under a slime bucket delivering punchlines about cafeteria food. Her brief time on the show gave her a taste of the entertainment industry, unscripted, unfiltered, and real. Morissette later admitted that the experience taught her the value of authenticity, something that became central to her music career. Then, there was Bill Prady, not a performer, but part of the writing and production team. Long before co-creating The Big Bang Theory, one of the most successful sitcoms in television history, Prady was helping craft gags for kids who couldn't stop giggling. His journey from writing slime jokes to writing for scientists might sound strange, but the connection is clear. Both required an understanding of timing, absurdity, and the power of simple humor. Together, these unlikely alumni embodied the strange magic of "You Can't Do That" on television. It wasn't a training ground for fame, it was a playground for creativity. And in that playground, a rock icon and a television legend took their first steps. Fact number 3. Almost every adult character was played by just 2 people. In a show packed with dozens of child actors, you might assume the adult cast was just as varied. But in truth, almost every adult role, every teacher, every parent, every clueless authority figure was played by just 2 people, Les Lye and Abby Hagyard. Les Lye was the show's iron anchor. He appeared in every single episode, playing a staggering range of characters: the perpetually grumpy dad, the sarcastic schoolteacher, Mr. Shitler, the lecherous bar owner, even the executioner in the dungeon sketches. His range bordered on the absurd, sometimes switching characters mid-scene, with nothing but a change of hat or accent. Abby Hagyard joined later, bringing the same multi-character energy. She played moms, newscasters, nurses, and teachers, each exaggerated, satirical, and wonderfully out of touch. Together, Lye and Hagyard represented the grown-up world in all its ridiculousness. To the kids on screen, they were obstacles. To the kids watching, they were caricatures of every adult they'd ever rolled their eyes at. The dynamic between the children and these 2 adults became the show's core rhythm. Lye's booming voice, his exaggerated disapproval, and Hagyard's over-the-top scolding gave the sketches their energy. Even when the jokes were outrageous, the chemistry kept it grounded. Behind the scenes, both actors were deeply respected by the young cast. They created a safe space where kids could experiment, fail, and laugh freely. Their willingness to look foolish, to be the butt of the joke, taught the children an invaluable lesson. Authority can be funny, and laughter can be power. In an era where adults often dominated children's entertainment, you can't do that on television. Flip the script. Here, the kids were the heroes, and the adults, no matter how loud or ridiculous, always ended up covered in slime. Fact number 2. Nickelodeon's entire identity came from a mistake. The most famous image from You Can't Do That on television. A kid drenched in dripping green slime wasn't the result of a brilliant design meeting or careful planning. It was an accident. A smelly, moldy, gloriously disgusting accident. According to producer Jeffrey Darby, the slime's origin began with a dungeon sketch that required a bucket of sewage. The crew asked the cafeteria to collect leftover food scraps from lunch, mashed potatoes, soup, milk, vegetables dumped into one large bucket. The plan was to use it later that day. But the scene got delayed, and then delayed again. The bucket sat in a warm studio for a week. When someone finally lifted the lid, the contents had transformed into something unholy, a thick, bubbling green mass of mold and decay. Most people would have thrown it away. But Roger Price wasn't most people. He stared at the festering mess for a few seconds and said, "Dump it on the kid anyway." That moment changed television history. The shot looked incredible, repulsive, hilarious, unforgettable. Kids screamed, laughed, and rewound their VHS tapes to watch it again. The green slime became the show's signature, spreading to other Nickelodeon programs, game shows, and even award ceremonies. It evolved from moldy cafeteria waste into a global symbol of childhood chaos. For decades, Nickelodeon has tried to recreate that same magic with synthetic slime, now made from food coloring gelatin and baby shampoo. But nothing ever matched the raw, grimy authenticity of the original. The brand's entire identity, fun, rebellion, and fearless mess was born from one accidental act of laziness and courage. Sometimes genius doesn't come from innovation. It comes from not cleaning up after lunch. And finally, fact number 1. The show that should never have worked became a legend. By every traditional measure, You Can't Do That on television should have failed. It was chaotic, low budget, and constantly teetering on the edge of bad taste. Its stars were untrained children, its humor was unfiltered, and its production values were barely held together with duct tape and sarcasm. And yet it worked beautifully. The show tapped into something that no one else on television had captured: the authentic voice of childhood rebellion. It was messy, imperfect, and alive. It gave kids permission to laugh at the very adults who ran their lives. It told them that school could be ridiculous, that authority could be mocked, and that getting dirty could be glorious. Over its 11-year run, You Can't Do That on television produced 144 episodes, aired across continents, and inspired an entire generation of creators who grew up on slime and satire. It didn't rely on merchandising or polished celebrity hosts. It thrived on chaos, honesty, and the courage to be weird. When the show finally ended in 1990, Nickelodeon was no longer an obscure cable channel. It was a cultural force. And it owed much of that success to the strange, scrappy little Canadian show that refused to play by the rules. Even today, its legacy lingers. Every time a celebrity gets slimed at the Kids' Choice Awards, every time a cartoon leans into gross humor or rebellion, that's You Can't Do That on television, echoing through pop culture. It was the show that didn't teach, didn't behave, and didn't care what anyone thought. And that's exactly why it became unforgettable. In a world of polished programming, You Can't Do That on television stood as a glorious rebellion. Born in a small Canadian studio, it dared to be messy, funny, and real. It made mistakes, big ones, but turned those mistakes into magic. From Christine Moose McGlade's accidental casting to the moldy bucket that birthed Nickelodeon's green slime, every part of its story was a happy accident wrapped in laughter. It didn't teach lessons, it broke them. It didn't avoid chaos, it celebrated it. And in doing so, it created a space where kids could see themselves not as perfect students, but as real, flawed, funny human beings. Today, its influence can be felt in every show that lets kids laugh at authority, every sketch that dares to be silly, and every drop of green slime that falls on live television. You can't do that? On television wasn't just a TV show, it was a revolution in a bucket. See you in the next video. This is TV Time Capsule.